Annie, bonjour, bienvenue, welcome. My name is Nathalie Desrosiers, and I'm the principal of Massey College. It's my great privilege to welcome you all, practitioners of democracy, students of democracy, people worried about democracy. Welcome, welcome to be here tonight with us. I want to acknowledge that Massey College and the George Ignatius Theater, where we are, is built on indigenous lands, the lands of the Yonwanda, the Seneca, the Onoshoni. It has been the place of residence and ownership by indigenous people for thousands of years. It is the treaty land of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship toward this land and the great privilege that we have to be here together to celebrate and think about democracy. I particularly want to thank Citizen and Murray and Pauline, that you'll meet in a few minutes, for approaching Massey College to be part of this event tonight. Massey College's mission is to nourish learning and serve the public good, and we do this by investing in junior fellows and inviting community to reflect on their role of mentorship and investment in the future. And events like tonight, interdisciplinary, intellectual context, intergenerational conversations are what it's all about. So I want to thank again Marie and Pauline for bringing this idea to my attention, and without further ado, bonne soirée. Enjoy your evening.
Good evening, everybody. Your Honor, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Democracy is facing its biggest challenge since the Enlightenment. And everybody here tonight agreed to join us because of that fact. Nothing more. There are no party affiliations in this room. We're going to remember that we work for democracy, first and foremost. In the last few decades, we've forgotten that. And I think we've become so party-focused that we've forgotten that we are Canadians, Americans, Brits, French people, etc. We've got to remember our humanity, or democracy fails. And recently, we have failed to be good stewards of democracy. Citizen, as you can see, is a corporation that I founded along with a great number of people that are here tonight. It takes a village to raise a child, and the goal of Citizen is to improve the health of democracy all over the world. And we have given our capital, our treasure, all of our reputations to creating an environment that's going to allow discourse to be returned to the political system, and not for one side or the other, but for the country. And that platform, we hope, is going to create a new generation of young people who can contribute to the democratic fabric of our beautiful societies. For those of you who know a little bit about the history of democracy, let me just say this. Really nice countries have come apart at the seams that were once democracies. And most recently, we've lost many democracies in this world. For the first time in 300 years, the number of societies that are democratically ruled is contracting. And the number of people in the world has fallen by hundreds of millions of people in the last few years that are under democratic governance. Autocratic states, sclerotic states, states that have become that have too much internal fighting are starting to destroy that fabric, and that's creating the condition where people who have less noble goals can enter the political scene. And so tonight, I repeat, it's about democracy, that's all. We want to remind ourselves of the importance and the beauty of our societies, and I think the reflection here tonight with all of you shining, shimmering people is a reflection that this is an important matter. For you to take time out of your schedules to fly in from the United States, New York, fly in from New Brunswick, to fly in from Europe, and for all of these incredibly important and powerful, wonderful people being here, I think it's a representation that we all care and that something better can be built if we give our minds to it. And so with that, I'd like to welcome everybody, in particular Her Honor, for dignifying us with your presence. all of the guests that we have and the speakers. And I think tonight, as the film that we're about to watch is entitled, Chaos Isn't the Only Thing Afoot, There's Also Hope. And so with that, I think we will begin the screening of the film. When we're done that, we're going to invite the film producers. Oh, are you next? So with that, I'll invite Pauline up to make some remarks.
Nice try, Murray. Nice try. I'm so excited to see you all here. Many of you, of course, are my friends, and but many of you I don't know. And we have a really great evening in store for you. I just want to give you a little bit the run of the show, housekeeping. We have asked Her Honor to come because democracy is a theme of her tenure as our Lieutenant Governor. She has been a great promoter of democracy, and when you came in, you may have noticed the beautiful banners from the exhibit that has been in her chambers. And it was so popular and so important that they designed a traveling exhibit, which any of you can call on, by the way, if you'd like to have it in your local library or someplace. You can call the LG's office, get in touch, and you can have the democracy exhibit. They've also provided the free democracy books, little booklets based on the exhibit. They're on the table at the entrance. I encourage you to pick one up and look at it. Her Honor Elizabeth Dowdeswell is a much-loved figure in Ontario and around the world, actually, because she's a former head of the United Nations Environment Program. She's done very many distinguished things over her long career. And she's in her 9th year as Lieutenant Governor. They haven't noticed that the appointment expired 4 years ago. They just keeps going because nobody wants to take her out, is the problem. So because she has made democracy a theme, we asked her if she would be willing to screen this film in advance and reflect on it and open tonight's event with her thoughts on democracy and on this beautiful film that we're about to see. After she has done that, we'll screen the film. Ms. Murray, so let's get the order. Her Honor will present the film, we'll screen the film, and then after that, we will have a short panel discussion. We'll talk to C.C. Chan, the great C.C. Chan, who is here from Boston and Manhattan, and she will be introduced more fully later, but she will give us her thoughts about why she made this film. And we'll get the reflections of Stacy Spiegel, who is a great Canadian artist, much better known around the world than in Canada, ain't that the way? And Akash Maharaj, who is a great democracy advocate. So we'll look at the film, the history, and what we can do in the future in brief ways. And then because we have this distinguished crowd here, we'll open it up for Q&A before packing it all in early enough, hopefully, that you can all go and have a nice dinner or a glass of wine. So, Your Honor, if you would come.
Thank you very much, Pauline. And good evening all. Bonsoir, bonjour, mes chers amis. What an absolute privilege it is to be with you to reflect at this amazing moment in time. This special screening of 2020, Chaos and Hope, speaks about a challenging year of multiple colliding crises and a time that consequently laid bare the inequities that have always existed. It documents a public health emergency that became a trigger for unanticipated events. It's a visual journey that I'm certain you will find as poignant, compelling, and heartening as I did. For amidst a confluence of dread, despair, and disconnection, truly a chaos that most of us have never seen before, there is actually hope. It resonated very much with my own personal experience during this global pandemic when we were all under lock and key. During that time, reaching out to leaders in government, business, media and the arts, healthcare, education, and civil society, I heard those stories of grief and poignancy, to be sure. But I also heard about the best of community building, stories of amazing creativity, collaboration, compassion, and empathy, stories of solidarity. And these are the conversations that carry on to this very day, quite simply because our collective global and local challenges continue. 3 years later, we're facing a pandemic that is certainly not yet over, the existential threat of climate change that has become very real, and an absolutely unthinkable war with shifting geopolitics. All of these global events that have an impact on the citizens of this province. We continue to be tested. We're actually at an inflection point, and that's precisely why evenings like this, where we dissect the observations of our immediate past experience, those lessons we've learned, or I hope we've learned, about interdependence and collaboration, of the importance of science and evidence-based policy, and certainly of the inequities in our fragmented system. All of these are lessons that are so crucial. In these times of fake news, misinformation, and echo chambers, when the very status of truth is at stake, the question is, who do we believe? And we must recommit ourselves to identifying common values and finding ways to build consensus. Indeed, I think there's never been a more important time for respectful conversations, honest, genuine dialogue with the right people at the tables, dialogue about who matters and what matters. How do we move forward? It seems to me that fundamentally what we're really talking about is democracy, because those democracy are really the rules by which we choose to live together as a society. Democracy is about so much more than a vote. And while the seat of our government is just down the street at Queen's Park, so much of our democracy actually takes place in the libraries, the public spaces, and theaters like the one we're in tonight. What you'll find is that implicitly, this film tells a story of the cracks in the many underlying institutions of democracy, whether it's the media, the judicial system, government, civil society, and the civil service. And it's really a story of the fragmentation of social cohesion. So I want to say congratulations to everyone involved in the creation of this remarkable film, and a special thank you to the organizers who've actually created this space for us tonight so that we will see it. For indeed, we are vulnerable. As proud as we are of our country, we are vulnerable as well, and we must be vigilant. For democracy is fragile, but we can move beyond panic, fear, blame, and hate. Democracy must not be a partisan issue. The search for a society that is resilient, ethical, and equitable actually requires individuals coming together in common cause. One person plus another makes a movement. And I thank all of you tonight, those in the audience who already are or will become champions of something that is so very precious, and that's our democracy. Do enjoy.
I didn't introduce myself before, but I'm an entrepreneur from Toronto. I grew up in the beaches, and in 1998, there wasn't much in the way of capital for investment-style companies. There weren't VCs like our friend Young or a variety of other people that are here today. And I ended up in the United States because the investors put money out from California and gave us $8 million to build a .com back in the day. And we built one of the first ECRM companies in the United States. And one of my proudest achievements is, if you've ever called Service Canada, it was our software that was being used to find us. So we're not responsible for the info, we're responsible for the but it taught me something, and that is that innovation matters. And this postcard that you just saw to democracy today, this incredible film, has illustrated the fragility of perhaps humanity's greatest accomplishment, and that is the creation of democracy. Now, democracy in this movie doesn't much look like the democracy that I'm sure these fine academics in this room teach their first-year students, okay? We teach our first-year students that democracy is a functional, incredible system, and it is. But it's also the hardest of all political systems to keep alive. Winston Churchill famously said that, democracy is the worst system of all, except for all the others. And what that fundamentally means is that it is up to us as people to guarantee democracy. If we don't, as people, act as the guarantor of that democracy, we will lose it. Galleries in Parliament, for instance, here in Canada, in Britain, and in the Senate and the House, which I've visited in the United States, are meant to be a representation of our power. And make no mistake, we have total and absolute power if we choose to exercise it. Citizen is not a company that's aiming to create one side or the other type power, but it's a really simple solution to a very big problem that was very beautifully illustrated in this movie. And that is that currently, the traditional shares of voice that are the guarantors and moderators of democracy, that is traditional media, politicians themselves, the academic community, and the corporate communities, the capitalist societies, all of these things are very important. But they pale in the total share of voice that they possess in media today. Today, if you take the sum total of all of our efforts and work, you take media, traditional media, you take, which is the fourth estate, you take the legislative, the executive, and the judicial powers, which are the first, second, and third estates in a country, and then you take the fifth estate, which is this new internet and social-based media, we don't matter. And in that share of voice, we are infinitesimal by comparison to the totality of the information and, as you've seen, the disinformation that is currently literally polluting not just us, but the children of our societies, the future of our societies, and the people who are rioting. Most of them, there are some that are, most of them actually believe that they're in some form of a Hunger Games where they want to hit the dam, blow up a dam, fix the society, get, President Snow. It's ridiculous. And it's up to us to change that. Citizen offers one thing: count every person's voice every day on every subject, period, and then allow everybody to access that information. You've all heard of ChatGPT in the last 3 weeks. Well, we've been building that for 4 years. And in the end, Citizen will allow every single person involved in politics, every person who's a citizen, every person who represents citizens to understand precisely what the people want. And here's the cool part. When all the people are measured, the extreme, which is the only thing you see in news feeds these days, disappears. Turns out there's only about 8% crazy people on either side. The rest of us in the middle are normal. We have lives, families, friends, people. All we have to do is count them and give them the right information to make the right decision. And when that information can be expressed in a credible way, what politician would not want to help win an election by doing what we've asked them to do? This simple solution, we hope, will change the world. But today, is not about Citizen. Citizen is here tonight just to create the space for democracy to exist. And we've done that by bringing together an incredible crowd of people. Your Honor, thank you very much for being here and dignifying us with your presence. You shine a light on democracy, and that allows us to then do what we can do after the fact. To our distinguished guests, the movie producers, thank you for coming. June Baylor couldn't actually be here tonight. She had some family matters that she had to deal with, but she, of course, is a terrific director and the partner of these two fine people. We're deeply honored to have been able to offer you this private screening of 2020. This movie is not yet available, for free. So this movie tonight is, by the grace of Cece and Gideon, brought to show you what's possible if we all come together. The film is entirely compatible with the values of Citizen. Our AI-driven platform will ultimately capture everything that we've described and hopefully provide politicians with a tool that they can use to best achieve electoral success for their constituents. Please consider downloading Citizen. That would be the greatest help that you can do to us. We've launched in Canada. We'll be launching in 90 other countries over the next 5 years. The next one is the United States. And I don't know if Susan Crystal is here, the Consul General of the United States. Oh, you did make it. My fault, 5:30, I said. But America is the oldest modern democracy, and it's also the place where the trends happen. So this trend that we see in the United States is coming here, and it's coming everywhere else, and it's up to us to sort of get together to do it. And the way we're going to do it is by shining a light on democracy's potential, both here and abroad. And to that end, I want to introduce some panelists that I think you're going to like very much. Could I ask for the bag to be brought down that is actually up, I believe, in the middle by somebody, for Pauline. Our first panelist is Cece Chan, of course. The great Cece Chan, executive producer of Chaos and Hope. She's a renowned strategic investor and a philanthropist who consistently, thank you very much, who consistently supports humanitarian and democratic causes. She founded ACE 91, the production company that's here to create films and TV series for entertainment and educational purposes. And she led the development of Professor Peter Frankopan's The Silk Roads, a film focused on global trading systems that began a century ago and continue today. She's a partner and managing director of Greater China at DASIM. Have I said that correct? Yeah. A Holland-based independent research-driven investment company with strong presence in telecom, media, and technology, the TMT sector for those that are in the space. And she co-invests, more particularly in clean energy. Cece is literally the sort of tip of the spear for most of the cool stuff that's coming out now. She's also a member of the Leadership Council at Facing History and Ourselves, which she's supported since 1998, and is the vice chair of the Dean's Council of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, which she's supported since 2007. She's on the executive committee of the USC Shoah Foundation, which was founded by Steven Spielberg 28 years ago. Is this where you get the film cred from? And after that, she produced this incredible postcard to democracy, 2020 Chaos and Hope. She is the writer also of the original treatment, so she's not just a fancy producer. She actually has put this thing together, and the theory behind it, and the thought, and the writing, and all the rest. In just a moment, I'm going to ask Pauline actually to come up to speak to Cece about her decision to make and finance in the film. And then after that, we'll hear a brief historical perspective from Stacy Spiegel, our second panelist that is here tonight. Stacy is a particular case study in, and I do strongly suggest you pay attention to it, in what can happen when democracy goes bad. Precisely what we're talking about here tonight. Stacy's an artist, an exhibition and experience designer in most of the great museums, a new media visionary, former fellow at MIT's Center for Advanced Visual Study. He's the co-founder of PW Labs, Inc., creating compelling experiences for more than 50 international clients since 1997, Norway, Germany, Netherlands, Japan, the US, Canada. But not surprising to most Canadians here, he's better known elsewhere than he is at home. Canadians are we're a bit anti-celebrity, I think. And while many galleries around the world hold his work as an artist, it's because of his most recent major exhibition in Mannheim, Germany's Marchivum, which is their sort of archive, that we asked him to comment on this film. Stacy's an artistic director for 2 exhibitions that launched there. One explores 400 years of the city's history, while the second, and this is the sort of key, the rise of National Socialism in the sort of Weimar Republic and then the Third Reich, starting from the First World War, and highlighting the critical role of the individual in preserving the democratic process, or rather, through the stories you're going to hear, what happens when we don't. Working with 100 historians and archivists, Stacy designed the exhibition to be housed in the World War II bunker that sheltered 11,000 of Mannheim's residents at the end of the war. It follows the lives, and this is really cool, and that cool is the wrong word, informative. It follows the lives of 11 families and the decisions they made every day between 1933 and 1938. The consequences of those decisions were catastrophic, and these are regular people we're talking about. Stacy will use that lens tonight to share his thoughts about the fragility of democracy so that we might draw lessons from today's film. And finally, we're going to have Akash Maharaj, who I think for many of you here, he's actually a Massey Fellow, am I right? So he was pre-approved before we even started. He'll speak briefly about what the film teaches us about how it's relevant here in Canada, and not just in the United States, and what we can do to make a difference, literally us, tonight, after today. He works to strengthen pluralism with societies and peace between nations. Very lofty goals, and if you listen to any of his podcasts, which I know he knows I do all the time, they're terrifically informative and not a bunch of nonsense that wastes your time. His project brings together peoples, communities, and states to foster mutual understanding and to resolve conflict. They've included peaceful coexistence in the states of the former Yugoslavia, national reconciliation after the Sri Lankan Civil War, and addressing in particular post-genocide trauma. He also serves as ambassador at large for the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, an increasing problem that we're seeing just about everywhere, including here. He's addressed the United Nations on international prosecution of crimes against humanity, and he has special commitment to reconciliation in conflict states. As an international athlete, no less, he was triple gold medalist, thank you for that, Canada's happy, triple gold medalist at the International Championships of Equestrian Skill at Arms, and he subsequently led the Canadian equestrian team and federation as CEO through the team's most successful Olympics and Para-Olympics of all time. After the panelists have finished their brief presentations, we're going to open up the discussion to you. There's a bunch of microphones around the room. You are all an extremely distinguished group of people. I personally watched over all of the invitations and saw who's here. And so I really do encourage you to ask these questions. And with that, I'd like to invite the great Pauline Couture, who I might add, just before I say anything more, I wasn't to introduce you, but I do want you to know the work that this wonderful woman has put into this thing, and I wish to say thank you to it. So I invite you, Pauline, to come up and to bring your guests on stage.
Are the mics live? Are we? Can you hear me? That's good? Okay. All right. Well, I know that we've asked you to sit still for quite a long time, and we're not going to be here forever. We're going to make this fairly compact. But I've only seen the film twice, but I cried almost as much a second time. Cece, what made you? I mean, you are an extraordinarily successful person above and beyond all your philanthropic engagements and all of the things that you give back. You're out there generating a lot of money. I think you made your first $100 million investment at the age of 24 or something.
23.
Like 23. Oh, excuse me, 23.
Been working hard for a long time.
Yeah. All right. So why would someone like you do this? Why did you make this film? What is it that drove you to put all of the effort and money and thought and passion into this?
Thank you, Pauline. I just want to take a few quick seconds to say thank you to Pauline and Mary and all the people who made this possible. That's your answer. You know, I think greatness is found in all of us coming together. No one individual is great. So please do not use that again in front of one individual, perhaps maybe in the case of Mom, her honor. Seriously, I deeply believe in the universality of humanity, e pluribus unum. Ever since I was a little kid, I have been blessed with this generous spirit. I have always had the ability to think of other people before I think of myself. When I was 15 or 16, I wanted to be a journalist. And I went to the Boston Latin School, and it was founded in 1635. So in order for the school newspaper to be published, the kids had to go raise money for it, right? Even though we were academically rigorous, unlike rich schools, we had to go find the resources. So that was the origin of why I became an investor. To make the world better, you need capital. And this is what I've been doing consistently since I was a little puppy. 1985, started working, and yes, 1986, I had the first blessing of completing with my then senior partner, in this firm, first $100 million investment, and that's what I've been doing. I'm a strategic investor. So during COVID, I went to the office by myself every day, 7 days a week, 8 to 12 hours. I love to read, I love to learn. So I was asking myself, how did we get here? How did the United States end up being in this place where people are believing you can drink urine to cure COVID, etc.? So this was my attempt to record something for all of us, humanity. I said to the people at our very first, very private screening that we made the film for you all, for human beings. And so I wrote the treatment, the arc of the story, and I'm very blessed with Oscar-winning June Beeler, who had spent over 30 years working relentlessly, selflessly, making the world better. She was the first executive director of Steven Spielberg's charity, which started over 30 years ago, and that was created to tell the stories of the Holocaust survivors. That's our background. We went the end. We learned from Holocaust survivors, so we know that something like this will always end there. And it doesn't matter whether it's Jewish or any other subgroup.
I don't know if she told you when you spoke to my friend Carol over here, but her mom was actually one of the people interviewed in June's 50,000 interviews for the Shoah Foundation. So her mom was one of those people, and it's touched so many people.
That's awesome.
Why have you devoted such a large percentage of your activities to anti-Semitism?
Great question. People ask me that all the time. One more time, I believe that all human beings are the same. I think that it would be so hilarious were it not so sad that people actually believe in the supremacy in the form of skin color or outlook appearances. I'm always going for the substance of the person, right? It's nice to have an outside package that's good, etc. But it's the essential, the character, the substance of the person that makes us who we are. And so strategically, because I'm a strategic investor, I believe that if I could help walk some of the people through the prism of what happened during the Holocaust, right? This is not a contest. I'm also heavily, as Gideon knows, supporting civil rights and voting rights. And a dear friend of mine is creating a prison reform center, both at Georgetown as well as a lot of work at USC, which I would love to tell you more about. real substantive work. So this is not just about one subgroup. But I personally believe that if more people could understand exactly what happened during the Holocaust. I was 21, buried 21. I got myself to Dachau. I don't know what drove me to do that, Stacey, but took the public transportation, and I was shocked. I was blown away by the meticulous presentation of that place. And that existed for one reason only, to kill as many Jews as possible. And I have to share this one story, but I was blessed with an audience with His Holiness in June of last year. And we were there, so blessed, to present a letter that was written, typed, and signed by Hitler himself on September 16, 1919. His Holiness wanted a copy of this letter in the Vatican archive. The original is in LA, inside museum that I support. And what did the letter say? You know, Hitler was relatively young then. The letter said, to get rid of all the Jews, we need state power. Churchill was right. Democracy is the worst form, except we haven't got anything better. So we're here self-selecting, all of us, to protect that which is worth fighting and dying for.
All right, so that's a good entree to Stacey. Can we have Stacey's visuals on the screen, please, while Stacey's speaking? Just give people a flavor of this incredible thing that he has done. So Stacey, go ahead. Talk to us about this.
Well, first of all, it's truly an honor to be here and have witnessed this production, this amazing production you've done. I live in a slightly different world. The project that we're talking about today is half a world away. It takes place in Germany, and it's really, the mission was very much similar to your mission, with the caveat that we wanted to take an 80-year perspective, look back 80 years and see what actually happened in Germany that fractured democracy. Could we take apart that history? So the director of the Maschivum, a state archive, asked the question of, what constitutes the fragility of democracy? What happened, and can we trace that, and can we understand that in a larger context? And the really unique thing that he wanted to do was speak to a younger generation. So that's why he asked me.
That's why he asked you, right?
As funny as that may seem, because I work in a new media world. I work in a nonlinear, interactive, immersive world that kids are part of today. And in order to engage and empower them, we felt that we had to deliver the message using those tools. And it's inside of a Nazi bunker, and the start of the exhibition, or the title of the exhibition is, what does this mean to me? And we wanted to ask the question to a younger generation of what does that 80-year-old history from the First World War through the Second World War, what does that mean to them? How do they understand that? And for some of you may know that in 1976, the German museums decided that telling the story of the rise of National Socialism and what happened with the Third Reich and the Nazis would not be told in an emotional way. We've got to detach ourselves. There should be no emotion. We took a completely opposite perspective, because this is a highly, as you say, it's a highly emotional issue. And we wanted to use creative technologies, artistic expression, to really bring that forward. And I want to say that in the 3 years that I worked with PhDs on history to try to deconstruct what actually happened, there are the three elements of the film that you made that resonate for me. The first is I was confused when I was doing this project, and I asked the mayor of Mannheim, Dr. Peter Kurtz, I said, what is the core that we want people to understand about democracy? What is the one thing that somebody should take away? And he said that no one is above the law. That's the foundation level. And that really became clear in your documentary. The second thing that I think is really interesting that came out of our exploration and also shows up in the documentary is that every decision that you make in society has an impact. A decision you make for yourself or a decision you make for society shapes every day shapes the society you're part of. And people are not necessarily bad people, but they make bad decisions. And the consequence of that is what we saw, and that's a consequence that we saw in Nazi Germany. The third element that really comes clear in your documentary, and that what I saw over time, was that everyone in society must be treated equally. When one segment of the society is marginalized, the society falls apart. And we certainly saw that not only with the Jewish population in Germany, but with hosts of other migrants. The fracturing of society is easy. It's hard to hold it together. And when I think back to the lubricant, or the engine that really started to dissolve the German democratic society, the Weimar, and ended in the power of the Nazis, it's the big lie. The big lie, the first big lie that happened was in 1918 when the Germans were retreating, and the lie was that they won the war. And Hitler used that lie to gain his power. That why pay these war reparations when in fact we won? And he built his power on top of that. The next big lie, of course, was that the Jews were the reason of Germany's suffering. So one lie built on top of another, but a big lie that's allowed to exist, and we see it blatantly today, is really the lubricant that really dissolves our democracy as we know it.
Thank you, Stacey. Akash, this is all very sobering and heavy, and we're not by any means, any one of us, minimizing that. But I thought maybe you could bring a little note of hope here. You know, no one is above the law. Everyone matters. Fairness and a shared truth basis from which to discuss. So where are we in Canada, and what can we do? How can we leave here tonight thinking, I'm better armed to protect democracy?
Those are big questions. I think the film really did, from that perspective, the film lived up to its title. It was about both chaos and hope. And as a pathological optimist myself, I like the fact that it focused not just on a kind of sermon of woe, but a sense of what good has come out of this and what good may yet inspire. So I think there is a great deal of good that has come out of it and will come out of it, both for the United States and for Canada. But to answer your question, the Canadian context, you know, our country is an export-based economy, and I would have to say that one of our main exports is a bit of smugness about ourselves. A bit of smugness about ourselves. Does that help? Thank you. Oh no. Oh, that's on now. So, sorry. So I think that one of our main exports is a bit of smugness about ourselves, and I suspect that many of us watching this film thought, you know, this looks tragic. It also looks farcical, and that could never happen here. That obviously is not the case. When Dr. Fauci at one point said, you know, I've never seen this kind of division in my lifetime, I'm sure he was telling the truth. That doesn't mean it wasn't there. It just means he hadn't seen it. And the film did an excellent job at making it clear that coronavirus did not create social divisions in the United States. It exposed them and perhaps exacerbated them. I think it's fair to say that after these events, the events documented in the film, not just in 2020, but thereafter, Americans have been stripped of their illusions. But I think to a certain extent, we as Canadians are guilty, perhaps, in sometimes clutching our illusions closer to our chests. For any one of us who thinks, you know, that couldn't happen here, I'm struck by the fact that on Tuesday, the 5th of January, 2021, there were legislators in Congress saying this could never happen here. And on Wednesday, they were hiding under their desks. There is nothing inevitable about history. The world and history is littered with examples of states that have gone from being tyrannies to being free, and other states that have gone from being free to being tyrannies. It's always a question of choice. Do we have the wisdom to recognize the choices, and do we have the courage to take those choices together? And I guess I'll offer a couple of thoughts from my own perspective about what is it that, just from my own life and from having watched the film, that I think that we might be able to do as Canadians. One is that we must not make the mistake that so many others have made in underestimating the contagion of extremism. There's an old saw in political science: whatever you do, never talk about the Nazis, because that is a unique moment in history. But given, I'm here with Cece and Stacey, I have to talk about the Nazis. So I'll say just very briefly, when the Nazis came to power, one of the reasons they came to power was that other parties put them into power. They thought that they were buffoons. The phrase that was often used is, we can keep Hitler in a box. They did not keep Hitler in a box because they underestimated how quickly hatred can spread and the literal virality of it. The second is that words are no substitute for deeds. We hear a lot in Canada we have a lot of politicians who say the right things in Canada. And I think that we probably have more politicians who say the right things in Canada than people do in the United States. That doesn't mean we have more politicians who do the right things. And I think too often we in Canada are guilty of allowing high words to become a substitute for high deeds. And in fact, high words too often cast a long shadow over the low deeds of our governments. I do have a history as a partisan, I will confess it now. I was once National Policies Chair of the Liberal Party of Canada, and I mention that only to say that it is not because of political bias that I feel that too often in the current government, the main political philosophy is sanctimonious hypocrisy. If we had a government that did the things this government talked about, we would be living in paradise. We are not living in paradise. Several of the people in the film talked about inequality and how poisonous that is. And I think that we have to bear in mind that we also suffer from terrible inequality in Canada. It's often more genteel and often occluded from our eyes. But for example, 1/3 of the fabled 1% of our society work or worked for the same corporations as their fathers. And housing affordability today is at its lowest level in recorded history. It is literally the case that if you are a graduate of Massey College, you can expect to pay a higher percentage of your income trying to house yourself than if you are a peasant in New France. And I don't think that represents 300 years of progress. Another aspect, though, is to bear in mind that we are not enemies as Canadians. I remember during the truckers' protests in Ottawa, I live in Ottawa, I did not agree with anything those people had to say. I thought their ideas were preposterous, I thought they were badly motivated, I thought they were misled, but they are not my enemies. The kind of poverty and desperation and social manipulation that drove them to those actions, those are our common enemies, but they are not my enemies. And throughout my life, there has never been anything that has happened that has not convinced me or has caused me to doubt for a moment that the vast majority of Canadians are decent people. We are sometimes trapped in indecent circumstances and often trapped in indecent structures, but we are not enemies. And the basis of democracy, the basis of the idea of majority rules is that you can trust the majority of people. And if you don't have faith in the majority of your fellow citizens, then whatever else you have, you do not have a democracy. And I would say the last thing that I would offer up is the idea that was touched on by several of the speakers in the film, that we have an obligation to make good choices not just for ourselves, but with an eye towards the next generation. I come from a long line of centenarians and a few super centenarians, so it is possible that I have more years ahead of me than I have behind me. But it's also possible that I don't. And with that in mind, I sometimes think to myself that the world that I dream of, the world that I would like to be part of building, is not a world that I will live to see. And it's easy to despair with that. It's easy to feel hopeless. But I think that hope is for all of us, and hope is not just for our generation. The person from Fox News said, it's most important to make the right decision when it's difficult and when it doesn't benefit you. I think in a similar way, for those of us who are fighting for a better country, we have to fight even if that country isn't our country. We have to fight for that country, even if the fight will make it easier for future generations to experience that country. I'll close up since, we're not that far from Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And his most famous speech was undoubtedly his I Have a Dream speech. But for me, his speech that most touched me, has had the greatest impact on my life, is the speech that he gave to the Memphis sanitation workers, the last speech of his life. And in it, he said, I'm going to get this wrong, but effectively he said, I will not get there with you, speaking of the country that he hoped to build. But I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. As a very young person, that had a huge impact on me because I thought, how brave this was, because less than 24 hours later he would be dead. And he saw that coming, and nevertheless he fought on. Later on in my life, I think my perspective on it changed, and instead I was struck by the prescience and the determination that he showed, that he knew his life was coming to an end, and he did not blink. I think now at this stage of my life, what it makes me think of is the fact that not just was he prescient, not just was he brave, but it emphasized that what he was fighting for was not for himself. He was fighting for the hope of creating a better world for people who are not yet born, and that is what gave his life meaning, not the idea that he himself would enjoy the benefits of that. Sometimes I do despair, and I feel skeptical, despite my optimism, but I know that, however bad things may be sometimes in Canada, we are a better country today than we were in the past. That makes me optimistic that we will be a better country in the future than we are today. And it does make me think that we, as Canadians, will make it to the promised land. Thank you.
Thank you, Akash. One thing we can learn, of course, in Canada is from our Indigenous peoples who look at everything in 7 generations perspective. And when you step back and think about that, it's pretty hard to be sanguine about stupid decisions. So I'd like to, this is a really illustrious audience of amazing people. And all of you have at least as much or more to say than we do here on the stage. Is there anyone who would like to, we have a couple of mics, we have some mics here. Is there anyone who would like to comment or question? Please, step up. Can you say your name, please?
Yeah, hi. I'm Noah Kahn. I'm a junior fellow at Massey College. And when I was watching the film, I was trying to take on the perspective of like a 5G QAnon kind of person, right? Because I think the film appealed to my sensibilities, but I was trying to figure out, what would it look like to someone of a different persuasion? And I know these people well, so I think I was able to take on that perspective. So I was wondering, what would the film, or what would any of you have to say to somebody who's watching this and feeling like, oh, this has got to be, some agenda from this person, or the economic elite, or just choose any group and put it there. So I was wondering, I guess, what would you say to that person if they were here?
I think that's a question for you, Cece.
I would take a shot at it. It's actually an excellent question, by the way. And what Murray said earlier was very inspiring. You have the extreme left and right. This film is made for the people in the middle. It is a very conscious effort to bring people back into the circle, to have dialogue. We can agree to disagree. I don't know how to engage with a person that says, I love to chop up babies and eat them in the morning, if you understand what I'm saying. So I'm a pragmatist. This is a strategically created asset so that anyone can use it. I'm already offering to people who want to run for Senate, use it to fundraise, get the people together. This is to enable people that might not agree with each other to have a conversation, but it must be constructive and respectful. Does that make sense?
Yeah. In that light, actually. Okay. Akash, when you spoke in September at the launch event for Citizen, you told us a little story about owning a pickup truck and going out and actually talking to some of those truckers as they were coming into Ottawa, just, because talking is the start of being on common ground.
They also assumed that because I drove a pickup truck, I must be there for the protest. And they were so disappointed to find out that I wasn't. But it was enlightening for me. And I've just...
But is the pickup truck maybe, it's a device in your story, but isn't there always a pickup truck? Isn't there always some kind of a loophole through which you can reach someone to open a dialogue?
There always is. And I think you're right. I mean, although I laugh at it, what did the pickup truck say to them when they saw me in it? They said, "You're like me. We are the same." And
how are you dressed, by the way?
Not like this.
Just wondering about that.
But I would say that, it did lead to interesting conversations. And the main thing that I took away from it is, as much as I did not agree with them any more than when I started, but I felt I understood them more. I felt that...
And that's a start, isn't it?
It is a start. And people generally, we are all creatures of emotion before we are creatures of reason. Even if you don't agree with one another, people want to feel that they've been heard and that you understand the pain that has driven them to that position. And that goes a long way, even if you still disagree.
Right. Thank you. Sir, can you give your name?
Sure. Thank you. My name's Paul Grenier. I'm thankful to be here today and get an invite. I spent 15 years in public life as an elected city councilor in the Niagara region. My concern, and we have this wonderful, beautiful film, by the way, but we're preaching to a audience that's already converted and committed to the tenets of democracy. The last provincial election here in Ontario, our turnout was 43%. We've elected city councils across Ontario and across the country with less than 25% of eligible voters. And we throw our shoulders out, patting ourselves in the back if our federal turnout is in the low 50% range. How do we engage those people that have checked out? Like, democracy is work, and it's not going to come together unless we bring those people that have already checked out and not paying attention to any of the message here of hope and optimism and the benefits of democracy. People have tuned out, and I think that is a bit of a recipe for the extremism to take hold. But is there a way that, through energy in this room and commitment, that we can bring more people back in and have a commitment to our civic obligations?
While we're thinking about who should answer that question, Paul, I just want to tell you, I was at an event, I met Bill Clinton at an event a number of years ago, and he said one thing that really struck me that speaks to what you're saying and what we've been saying, which is we have to make the us bigger and the them smaller. It sort of often comes down to that. Right?
Yeah.
Who wants to pick up on Paul's answer? Stacey, you want to take a crack at it?
I think that...
You're in the business of engaging people.
Yeah, and I think that's a biggest problem we have, is that we tell stories to each other, but we tell them in ways that don't necessarily cross generation, cross culture, cross gender. And I think, using new media in particular, not just social media, but using our institutions and making them more interesting by having them embrace new media to tell these complicated stories to a younger generation will get them involved. Because at the end of the day, our democracy depends on the younger generation. We're aging out.
Oh, good, Fiona.
I just want to add a few
Sure,
narrative to both questions, actually, because they're related. Of course, we need to bring people back into the circle. And I think, as Pauline said, it is just a relentless slate of work, right? We lost the House by 3,500 votes. If we had won the House and the Senate, I think the Ukrainian war would probably end much sooner. So this is concrete, this is not abstract. And what happened on November 8th, that was encouraging. And the single most important thing that's driving this diversion is we now have hundreds of billions of dollars in profits in cash being made by people who is very focused on lying 24 hours a day, because this is now a business model, which is why in my film, In the Ark, I said, if you give me two choices, how do we heal the world as rapidly as possible? A is reduce the disinformation, and the other is reduce the income inequality. Bam, right there. A lot of that will be taken care of itself.
And those are both things that governments can change.
We come together.
Yeah. Fiona Blunden is a great Indigenous leader, and we're delighted that you're here, Fiona.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Massey Cho, I appreciate this film, the good thoughts, the inspiration for change. As I was watching the film, I was thinking to myself, sometimes I wonder whether the democracy that I'm living is the same democracy that everybody else is living in Canada. As an Indigenous person who was here before Canada was even Canada, I wonder about that path. I was sitting here and I was thinking to myself, I think I might be the only person in this room that still carries a card that represents Indian status in Canada, that identifies me as a race. And I carry it in actually my purse today to make sure the government can track me, to make sure that I exercise my right as an Indigenous person to not be invisible, to not be forgotten. The last 5 years in Canada has been so transformative for Indigenous nations. Transformative because of COVID, transformative because of the children that have been found at residential schools. I personally feel the change. I feel the change and I think the change. I wonder, and this is my kind of question or thoughtfulness together, is, as an Indigenous person, there are so few of us in Canada. How do we continue to bring in other citizens that we need so much to create the transformation, to create the change? My children need other Canadians to create the change with us, not in isolation, not by ourselves. And for the most part, we're hidden within our communities from the rest of Canada. And I wonder, even with the children being found over the last several years that affect every Indigenous person in Canada, are we still being seen? There have been so many children found that are Canadians no longer seeing it? What's transpiring for historically in other countries we're living through right now, today, within the last couple of weeks. And how do we continue to make sure that we're connecting with Canadians and bringing them into our issues for that transformation? I look at my children and I think to myself, I'm not just parenting children, I'm parenting warriors of change. And warriors are such a strong word, but that's exactly what I mean. Warriors of change that are going to help to build a new Canada and show the rest of the world what reconciliation looks like, what human rights and that change looks like, only it's in real time. It's not in the past, it's here for Canada and for Canadians. So sometimes I just, I'm thoughtful about the disconnect between the democracy I'm living through and how I'm connecting with other Canadians to ensure that we're doing this together in our country right now, as opposed to another country, some other time, or something that happened in the past. And what do we do? I wake up every day optimistic. I don't wake up every day jaded. I wake up believing we can do this. And I love that. I'm inspired by that. My family lived through residential schools, so I could be here. My mere survival is the disruption. And I embrace that. But I love my country, and I love what we're trying to do together, and I believe in it. Sometimes I just wonder whether other Canadians are forgetting us. Masicho.
Miigwech, Fiona. Afterwards, I want to introduce you to somebody who I think there's some cool things going on that we don't have time to get into right here and now, but that I can connect you to. So see me afterwards. Any one of the three of you want to comment on that? It was a very powerful statement that stood alone. We perhaps don't need to.
I can
comment, but-
add some positive note. The Kennedy School had just funded a platform actually that transcends national lines. Gideon, get Fiona's contact, we'll set up some information. So this has become a universal focus, which is what I was talking about. You know, this is not about the subgroup of Jews or, native people. It's about humanity. I know why Akash was voted the first president outside of the country, because he spoke beautifully about what Dr. King's aspiration was. I got an A+ during I Have a Dream, so you were much more advanced than I. Like Stacy asked, why did I give so much of my philanthropic support to Holocaust education? It's the same thing, right? In the 1960s, people were fighting for civil rights. Elijah just got killed 3 years ago. I mean, privilege is being able to go home when you go to the store.
And some guy shot up all those Asians in California on the weekend. I mean,
Right, so that's a combination of either some measure of racism or mental illness. But one more time, privilege is not having parents who are multi-billionaires. It's about being able to go home when you go to a store. Right, Gideon?
Yeah. So you want to come back?
Sorry? Excuse me, if I could be privileged in saying one or two words, and I hope my words do carry.
Sure.
Notwithstanding the lacking of might. I watched the film very carefully and distilled. My name is Monty McMurchie, and I'm a Torontonian, and I endorse, I applaud, I submit. And my comment or takeaway, as Roald Dahl, the short story writer, eminently said, I don't lie, I don't deceive, I merely make the truth more interesting. And there's a great deal of takeaway. And my comment or my lamentation is, do we forget, or how do we recapitulate and go forward? And the top program was doing the election of the speaker when CPAC was roaming everywhere. And every mutative congressman said, I serve, I'm here to serve. And yet, when they leave Congress, their budget or their personal wealth increases. And as Plunkett said of Old Tammany Hall, I've seen my opportunities and I took them. I don't mean to be cynical. And how do we get to take the cynical out of it? And I respect with a great deal of deference in terms of what you are saying and how you are according yourself. But how do we recalibrate? How do we preach sincerity? And as Akash said, and I thought he said quite well in terms of our government, in terms of practice what you preach. And it's tough. We live in troubled times. It's not easy. And situations like this, I like to think, bring out the best in us. But where do we go from here? And I am not smug. I spend a great deal of time in regions post-conflict, and smugness has been literally torn out of me. In fact, I am so humble in a sense, learning from the others. And there's a balance going through when to be strong. If there is an algorithm, and I'm going to wrap up very, very quickly before I get the pitchfork, is that where do we go from here? And how do we take what we have and move forward positive? Because as the former elected member said, voting turnout is abysmally low. It's as if you don't care. If you don't care, you're not willing to participate in the process. And anger is palpable. How do you attenuate the anger? How do you migrate, mitigate? And these are not necessarily easy questions. But the film, and I say, Cece, I applaud you. It needs to be shown. It needs to be shown in every school here in Canada, in the States, starting in kindergarten, or maybe a little older.
Monty, get real, Monty, no.
It needs to be seen, so teachers can discuss it, because civics ideally where you learn to share your toys with others. Where if Ralphie is beating up Margaret, the other little boys and girls say, you don't do that, it's not nice, and it aggregates from there. But that is transformative, but politics is transactional. Once you are elected, what do you want to do? You want to be re-elected. That costs money. And then you sell your metaphorical soul. Because as Kissinger, the congressman who was outed, or
I'm the pitchfork.
Yeah.
We do have to wrap
Yes,
up.
we have to wrap this up now. Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And, we do have to wrap this up, actually. It seems it's later than it seems.
What happened?
Sorry.
Okay.
Sure. Last thing quickly, okay?
Very quick. Sorry about that. Maybe just to stick to some themes, and also thank you very much for the lovely film, and maybe building off of your really nice words earlier as well about how we move forward together. This reminded me a lot of Konrad Adenauer's use of humility to move forward in leadership during a time of really difficult change. And when I think about this and how maybe Canada and the United States can try to move forward, I think a lot about empathy as something that can be used in Canada and perhaps elsewhere as well to try and work through polarization. I think the challenge and the tension that I often feel when I think about this is how to leave room and create room for complexity in the political process, within young people as they try and figure out paths forward. So I guess my question as we wrap up very quickly is, how do you think we can try and create space for complexity in political life, in social life, just in general?
That's an absolutely key question and a good place to finish for tonight. Can we briefly get each of you to say 3 or 4 words about that?
Yes, we'll start with Akash.
Go ahead, Akash.
He's the scholar.
It's an excellent question. It's one of the questions of our time. If I can throw in just one thing, I would say that as we, as citizens, participate in debates about our rights, and that's something that has really come to the fore during the pandemic, we have a very rich dialogue of rights in Canada. We need an equally rich dialogue of responsibilities, because my ability to realize my rights rests upon the bedrock of the assumption that I'm meeting my responsibilities to my fellow citizens. And when we talk about the one in a vacuum, not connected to the other, that's when we start making demands on one another without thinking about, are those demands fair, are they reasonable, and what are my mutual expectations with my fellow citizens?
Complexities and trade-offs. Trade-offs are a big part of that. Stacey?
I don't think it's all that complex. In many ways, I think what you said in my mind is that we have a lot of decisions to make every day, and balancing the decisions between what is good for me and what is good for my society is something we have to consider. And whether it's minority groups within our society, whether it's Indigenous people, we have a lot to think about, but balancing that is simply a decision, and taking action on that decision, in my mind, is what is our way forward. And in that way, it's not that complex.
Great question. I want you to email that question. We can actually model a course at Kennedy School just for the whole semester. We can sit here for several hours, but very quickly, right? Because I'm fundamentally and strategically digesting it. If you look at the macro, for at least over 50, 60 years, not just the United States, the world had consciously played with the system and the laws and the rules to benefit the 0.0001, right? To which many of us belong. But that is not sustainable. Capitalism is great, but it has to be checked. So this is the 50, 60 years later, this is where we are now. I love that we included a cute little frame of Ronald Reagan. So that's macro, right? And this is now supercharged by the fact that we are distributing global disinformation, outright lies, 24/7, ferociously, right? 100 years ago, if Hitler wanted to reach 100 million people, it would have taken him a little bit of time. Today, probably 5 minutes. So policy, right? I love the fact that, and I mean it sincerely, not just because they are presenting the film, the concept of the app that's Citizen is very powerful, simple. Allow the people to vote. Let the people know what they're thinking. What do people in Florida think about not being allowed to learn history? Or Roe versus Wade, for example, or whatever the issue is that you have in Canada. This film is going to be shown around the world. I made this film to demonstrate that it had been failure of leadership, both in government, public sector, as well as private sector. It is unsustainable and is not acceptable. It is grotesque, the amount of income inequality. People should not be murdered because they went to the store and get something, male or female, young or old, no matter what the skin color. This is what we fight for. This is why we're here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all of you for coming tonight. Some of you I need to speak with a little more afterwards, but if you are heading out right away, thank you very, very much for coming and for contributing your time and your thoughtful questions. And we look forward to welcoming you to other Massey College and citizen activities in the future.